So you know how Hades is in the Bible?
All right, let's see it. And the fit today is the Thundercats. Ho.
No. Sometimes Hades is used as a placeholder for hell.
So the use of the Greek word Hades within Judaism originates in the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, where it is the most common rendering of the Hebrew word Sheol, which just refers to the abode of all the dead. In the Hebrew Bible, they don't distinguish an unfavorable afterlife from a favorable afterlife. Everybody goes to Sheol. By the time of the New Testament, there is a concept developing of going down into Sheol, the underworld, as a punishment versus going into heaven as a reward. However, these two concepts aren't quite systematized yet, so there are different conceptual frameworks that are being attached to them. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, it's just hell, because the concept of hell as we understand it wouldn't be developed until after the New Testament.
Well, what about in Revelation where it says, then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire? Well, because. Wait, hang on. The lake of fire clearly means hell there. So that doesn't make any sense.
No, it's not. Hades represents hell, according to the author of the book of Revelation, but again, there is no systematic concept of hell shared across the different texts of the New Testament. That would not be worked out until after the New Testament had been completed. So according to the author of the book of Revelation, hell itself, along with death, would be destroyed in that lake of fire. And that imagery of a lake of fire would be taken up by later Christians trying to impose a unifying systematic framework to create a single concept of hell, which would include a lake of fire. But if we let the book of Revelation operate on its own terms, the lake of fire and the abyss are separate from Hades/hell, which gets destroyed along with death.
They've already established that death is a living entity.
So they have personified the abode of the dead and the forces of death. And this is something that we see in the Hebrew Bible as well, where we have Mot, death, and Sheol personified in certain poetry. So those personifications don't govern all of the usage of those words. They just represent the agency or the power of those forces of death and the abode of the dead.
So why are the four horsemen kicking it with a Greek god?
The author is not trying to represent these personifications as the actual Greek manifestations of these gods. They're drawing more directly from Jewish traditions about personifying powers associated with certain forces.
Just to get this straight, they are conquest, war, famine, and death, right? Well, strictly speaking, that's just how we've interpreted them. The actual Bible passages never name them, and we've just inferred who they are. There's actually a lot of debate about that.
It is true that they are just described and not named, and that we have provided those names. It is not true that there's a lot of debate about that.
So what does the Bible say about them? Well, the first writer says that they arrived on a white horse with a voice like thunder, and they were wearing a crown, and they set about conquering. That sounds like Zeus.
It's not Zeus. It represents human conquest and warfare. So white horses were symbolic of military victory and of conquest. And there are folks who have suggested maybe this represents Jesus or maybe this represents some evil figure. But the majority of scholars agree that this is most likely a reference to military conquest and victory, and particularly as a bit of a rhetorical slight of the Roman Empire and its thirst for military conquest and victory.
Well, anyway, the second rider rode on a red horse, had a big old sword, and was granted to take peace from the earth and make men slay each other. So, Ares.
So the red horse here represents bloodshed, and the fact that peace would be taken from the earth is kind of thumbing its nose at the idea of the Pax Romana, suggesting that it's actually bloodshed that is undergirding all of that supposed peace.
Horseman number 3 arrives on a black horse and is kind of just weighing out grains and saying how they cost more than usual, the god of inflation. Or Hermes is the god of merchants. It's probably something he would comment on. He's also a psychopomp, meaning he escorts the souls of the dead to the underworld, which makes sense why he'd arrive with this crew.
So this is actually drawing imagery from the Hebrew Bible, where we frequently see talk of astronomical prices being charged for food staples because food shortages were caused by conquest and warfare and things like that. But notice that it also says not to harm the oil or the wine. And this seems to be thumbing its nose at the Roman imperial practice of diverting grain to feeding armies and diverting the rest of the resources toward the production of oil and wine, which were the more profitable products, leading to shortages while there is a proliferation of oil and wine. So this is, again, thumbing its nose at the Roman Empire.
And why he would precede the final rider, who arrives on an ashen horse, Death, who is then in turn followed by Hades. So Thanatos. The resemblance is undeniable, but I mean, why?
So the Greek word here that is sometimes rendered ashen is chloros in the Greek, and this is a reference to a kind of pale green that has a yellowish or a gray tinge and is symbolic of death or near death or a sickly pallor. And keep in mind, the horse imagery is actually drawing from the Hebrew Bible as well, from Ezekiel chapters 1 and 6, where it talks about white and red and then speckled horses, and then in chapter 6 it talks about white and black and red and speckled horses. So most of this imagery is coming from earlier Judaism, whether the Hebrew Bible or Greco-Roman period Judaism, and is aimed at the Roman Empire. It is not adopting Greek gods directly from their pantheon. And I'm not sure that this creator is being serious about this stuff. This seems like entertainment to me, that it's like, well, what if we thought about it this way? But this is certainly not what's going on with the imagery that is being used in the book of Revelation.